Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wisdom Chat. And my wonderful guest today is Richard Eaton. Richard, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Phil.
Thank you very much for joining me today. And Richard is the managing director of No Code Ninja. Now, Richard, you've got this business that's been running nearly 3.5 years, but you've been on your travels as well during that time. Tell us about the business and about a bit about how you've worked that out through your travels.
Yeah, so the business, as you say, is No Code Ninja. My whole sort of working life, if you jump back a long way, started when I was 14 years old, when I had my first software published. So I've got lots of software development experience. And No Code Ninja came about, let's say, 3.5 years ago, when I thought there's got to be a better way to develop software than the traditional builder team.
Yeah.
Spend days setting computers up, etc. And so I spent about 3 months evaluating different platforms of this new thing called no code. And that has proved to be a really successful way of developing software. So that's what I now do full time.
That's brilliant. And you've been doing quite a bit of that while you've been on your travels, because you've been to some exotic places, haven't you?
Yeah. So to give you the background to that, in 2019, myself, my wife, and my 2 children, who were aged 7 and 9 at the time, set off from the UK on a round the world trip. And it was going to be a year-long round the world trip. So we lived in, things did change as the world changed in 2020 there.
They certainly did.
Yeah. So 1 year actually ended up being 2.5 years. So the first 9 months went pretty well and according to plan. So we lived in places like the Czech Republic, Bali, New Zealand, Thailand, Koh Samui, and we ended up in Vietnam. And after we'd been there a couple of weeks, then sort of the whole COVID situation happened. And for want of a better phrase, we got stuck in Vietnam. Decided it wasn't a bad place to be. So we ended up staying there until December, so sort of Christmas time when we came back to the UK.
Wow. I can't think of any, worse places to stay than somewhere as exotic as Vietnam. But what was interesting, because you and I were chatting some time back about your travels and what you had observed, and I was talking to you about the work that I do around money psychology and money education, and we chatted about the people that you had met. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that you discovered when you met the sort of more the indigenous people of places like Vietnam.
Yeah, so in all our travels, we tried to stay amongst the local people rather than stay where expats were or in sort of holiday places. We wanted to live as locals. So we always tried to stay in areas where it was more local. So we obviously got to know the real people and how the actual country worked. So rather than the sort of holiday brochure type, this is what the country's like, that isn't really, it's all quite a facade. We saw the real countries and the real people. And so around money, there was some really interesting stuff. One of those things is how here in the UK and the West, everything is so digital and everything is just a tap of a card. In most of the East, everything is still very cash driven.
Right.
And there's a real mindset thing around that I guess on an emotional level, when you buy something, if you're handing over a big wad of cash, you appreciate how much you're spending. Where if you go to Marks and Spencer's and tap your card and spend £3.50 on lunch, or you go and buy a car for £20,000 with a tap of a card as well.
Yeah.
There's no sort of difference in the emotions of doing that, where, like I say, using cash for everything really makes you think about your spending. So that was one really interesting thing around money I discovered. The other big one was a lot of the people we met literally were living hand to mouth and didn't have much money, especially compared to people in the West. But something that was just black and white that I found is how happy these people were. They were totally content with their lot, as long as they could go to bed and not be hungry, and they make the most of everything. And family is important, all these things. So all the sort of trappings that the West think this makes you happy, so the fancy houses and fancy restaurants, all these things, actually it meant nothing to these people. It was all about, did they have a good day? Those kinds of things, and all about family and relationships. It's
interesting, the conversations I have with people about that, about their understanding of money. It's amazing how people will say to you things like, money can make you happy, or money gives you choice. Well, it contributes, yes, certainly, without a doubt. But it's like saying I'm not happy and I don't have choice unless I have money. So there then tends to be a pursuit of money, as though that money is going to give you something. So I'll say to people, in a word, what does money mean to you? And then they will list various things, some of which I've mentioned already. And then I'll say to them, okay, in order to be happy then, how much money do you think you have? And you can see them for the first time stopping and thinking about it and thinking, well, I've never been asked that question before. And you can guarantee whatever they come up with, it'll never be enough, because once they attain it, there'll always be that sense, oh, I need more and I need more. So that term, it's never enough, becomes quite poignant.
Oh, yeah, massively. And you see that all the time with people that do make a lot of money. So they go out and they buy a Lamborghini, and then one of the friends has a Lamborghini, but that's got bigger wheels, that's got this, that's the other. It's never enough, is it? It's always, you're all on this endless like hamster wheel of, oh, well, I'll be happy when I've got that Lamborghini with the bigger wheels now, etc., etc. Where really the happiness is sort of inside your mindset. It's not directly correlated. And like I say, I actually found the opposite from what I saw, that people were content, people were happy, even though they had nothing. And then when we did come back to the UK, he went around Vietnam. We were living in central Vietnam in Hoi An. And there were people, the first winter we were there was a typhoon season and there were floods, and people literally lost everything. The next day, they were still smiling and happy, rebuilding things. They just adapted and got on with it. They didn't dwell on those negatives, I think.
Do you think as well that they put different values on things? So whereas we might value our material possessions or value money, and there's a lot about money at the moment because of the rising cost of living, and more people now in work poverty, as the term goes. And so our focus is very much about the need for money, whereas these people, they don't have that money. They've had a flood and it's wiped them out, and yet they're still able to smile. Do you think they have different values to us, and what do you think those values might be?
Yeah, I think they're just trying to make the most of everything. And again, I think in the West, there's a culture of, if something is not quite right, you get rid of it and buy something brand new and shiny, etc. Where theirs is very much, a perfect example is scooters out there, because everyone uses scooters as their everyday transport. And there's Honda Cubs out there that were built in the 1960s that are still going as people's everyday transport. Wow. There's hardly any bodywork left. these things, and they're laden up. So some of the things you saw were amazing. The amount of bags, etc., hung on. So you're even seeing things like mobile shops, and they'd have a burning stove on the back of this scooter that looks like it's ready for the scrapyard. but it does the job, and
Yeah.
they just keep repairing it. So
Yeah.
it's a bit like Trigger's broom, I guess, where everything's been replaced.
Yeah. That is a wonderful example for our listeners who don't know what Richard's talking about. Trigger was a character on Only Fools and Horses, and he said that he'd had his broom. He was a road sweeper. He had his broom for 15 years. He'd only had however many handles and however many heads, and everybody sat thinking, so it's not the same broom then. But in actual fact, you're right. I remember going to Colombia, and it was one of the things that really struck me as we drove through the streets of Bogota. There was a lot of street traders, and they would be exactly the same. They would have a shop on wheels, and it'd be a bicycle. And it would be, I'm thinking, how on earth, the laws of gravity, how on earth do they manage to do this? Yet they do, and they seem quite content about what they're doing. So I've noticed that difference in Colombia. I just think it's interesting how we have certain mindsets here that put a lot of value on things and status and money. And it's interesting to observe some people who that becomes quite intrinsic to their life, how they compare themselves with others. So I remember going to a wedding one day, and there was a row of cars, and they were quite sort of expensive vehicles. And then this chap pulled up with this, I'm not quite sure what vehicle it was, but it was a sports vehicle. And all of a sudden, all the guys were out swooning around it. And he was, you could see he was just preening himself, I've got the best car here kind of thing. And actually that just speaks volumes of sometimes our Western culture, and we lose sight of real value, which is people. And you mentioned as well the mindset and how we have this almost like this belief that the external things create for us what we need. So if we need happiness, we're looking for it in external things, and when those things go away, we're no longer happy, or it's not enough, so we pursue it even more, and we never attain that happiness. And you're right, happiness is a choice. We have choices. We're powerful people.
Yeah. Exactly. There's so much that is sort of mindset, isn't there?
Yes.
And again, something I'm always saying is that if you're unhappy, then the material things won't fix that. But you'll be unhappy sat in your Lamborghini rather than sat in your Fiesta. You're still unhappy. You've got to fix the happiness thing first.
Yeah. Is that the Lamborghini with the bigger wheels?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's true. I just, and I'm sure you do see it every day in terms of how people. We're very quick to judge, aren't we? We're very quick to judge the externals. We hear this term, don't judge a book by its cover, but we do as a society. So one of the things I often come across is because the government for many, many years has used this rhetoric that we need to be a nation of savers. That's an interesting one, because there's so many people now who are working every hour they can and still can't even meet their basic needs. And so how are they going to save? And then the judgment comes, if you don't save, then you're not very good with money. And it's
like you say, it's interesting. Again, a huge difference I saw was a sort of honesty about money there that you don't get here, where, like say, people will judge people on what car they drive, the house they have, all these kinds of things, but no one will actually ask direct questions. Where something we found, which at first was wow, was that people would literally come up to you and they'd say, "Oh, how much money do you earn a year?" Or they'd go, "Oh,
wow.
you're in a nice house. How much does that cost?"
Yeah.
And there's just direct questioning around money, so
Right.
there's no sort of facade. It's
Right.
really interesting.
So they don't have that sort of that mindset that says, "Oh, I couldn't possibly talk about things like that."
Yeah,
Which
exactly. There's
which
a
is
sort of refreshing honesty
yeah,
around money and talking about money. They literally say, "Oh, well, how much was that?" Where you
yeah.
wouldn't say that to someone here, would you? It's
No, no. Or if you did ask the question, you'd feel kind of embarrassed asking it, but there
yeah,
may be a reason why you're asking it.
yeah,
Um, yeah, it's an interesting one that because we have created for ourselves a society where when we can't talk about money, and that is an absolute well, it's a myth in one sense, in so much as we can talk about money, but we've created this mindset that says, "Oh, it couldn't possibly. It's personal. It's it would be rude of me."
yeah,
And yet
exactly.
it's the very thing that we need to do is to talk about it and talk about it in a very matter of fact way, not in a judgmental way, just because somebody's got less than me, for example, or I've got less than them. I remember I was talking to the father of somebody to an event I was at, and we were just chatting, and you get to that age-old question of, "Also, what do you do?" Meaning, what do you do for work? And I remember him sort of cautious at first, and you could tell that. He just says, "Oh, I work in environmental." I says, "Oh," I said, "that must be interesting. What kind of things do you do on the environmental side?" And we went through a train of things, of descriptions, till eventually he told me he was a dustbin man.
Yeah,
And
right.
I remember walking away from the conversation and thinking, we need people like that. We shouldn't be embarrassed of being able to say
Yeah,
I'm a dustbin
exactly.
man, because
Yeah,
I tell you what, if it wasn't for dustbin men, our society, our externals would be an absolute mess.
yeah,
And I think of a chap that I met years ago. He'd been a labourer in a factory for 40 years. He was happy. Didn't think about working anywhere else or progressing. He was just happy in what he did. But I thought those guys wouldn't have been able to produce the products had it not been for him keeping the place clean and supplied with materials. And yet somehow we feel embarrassed about talking about these things. And I wonder if this is something we've built over many years. These mindsets and this wall that prevents us from talking about the very things we do need to talk about. In this case, money.
yeah. It's funny. It works the other way around as well, where sometimes people are embarrassed when they do have money. And again, I guess that
Yeah,
stems back
yeah,
a long way to what they've sort of been conditioned and taught in their early
yeah,
life, that they then feel embarrassed because
yeah,
maybe they started with nothing and the family
yeah,
still doesn't have much, and they feel embarrassed when they do have money because they don't
yeah,
want to feel like they're making the other people uncomfortable. So
yeah.
it's all quite
It,
complex subject, isn't
it,
it?
it is, and I meet many people in who have varying mindsets. People who do have money and shouldn't feel guilty about it, because it was worked for, it was earned, and yet do. And you realise in terms of the way they behave in terms of using their money, they have a poor mindset of themselves, a poor self-image. So they may spend it on other people, but they wouldn't spend it on themselves.
Yeah,
Or they may be driven by fear, perhaps fear of losing it all. What if I lose it all? So therefore won't spend anything, and might be construed as being selfish, mean. When in actual fact, if we ask the questions, like you said earlier, we just don't ask the questions. And that's what we need to do, is ask the questions, not judge somebody for the answer they give, but try and understand, where are you coming from? Why do you respond this way with your money? Why do you think that it's important to have all these material things and yet you're still not happy? Or Why is it that you've got all this money, but you just can't spend it because you feel guilty and ashamed? It's very interesting, complex mindset. But Richard, just thinking about your travels and some of those experiences you've had there has really helped with this conversation about people's mindsets around money. People may give an excuse that we are a Western society, therefore we have different economies and different approaches to things, but actually the principles are still the same. It's where do we put our value? And if we put our value in money, we'll be chasing something that may well elude us for the bulk of our lives. And yet, there are people in the world who can demonstrate to us that you can still be happy even when you've got nothing.
Oh, massively.
Yeah.
And like I say, the sort of the thing that cemented that for me was when we did come back and we'd left all these shiny, happy people who didn't really have much in the financial sense. And then when we sort of arrived back here, people that did have sort of financial success looked miserable as sin.
Yeah.
And it's seeing those sort of black and white contrasts really cemented that for me. It was like, well, all those people there were happy with nothing. You've seemingly got lots and you're still not happy. And again, that just really goes back to it's a mindset thing. Is your happiness rather than it being the money that drives it. It's the other way around.
Yeah. And you got to experience that firsthand when you made that choice to go on your globe-trotting with your family. Because obviously you couldn't literally carry everything with you. So you started to get rid of things and lighten the load, really, didn't you? You said to me it was kind of cathartic.
Yeah, so it was a really interesting experience to go through because over probably the last 7 years, maybe something like that, maybe more, then I sort of began to realize, or was in the early stages of, well, actually, all this stuff around me doesn't bring me happiness. And you think it does. Like 10 years ago, I was buying everything.
Yeah.
And then I started to realize that it's all sort of short-term dopamine hits, is this stuff. And actually, you'll buy something, you'll use it for a week, and then it'll sit in a drawer for 2 years. And I'm sure we've all had that experience.
Yeah, I was thinking, Richard, you were describing me then.
Well, I think most people are like that. And then I started to realize that was something that was happening. So I started only buying things if I really, really wanted, and it was going to either add something massive to my life or, more importantly, take something negative away from my life. So that's it's a whole other subject, but that's an interesting one, is removing negatives rather than trying to add happiness. But when we decided we were going to do this trip, we'd looked at storage and all these kinds of things, and we sort of said, you know what, let's just sell everything we own. We can rebuy things. And I'd already got rid of a lot anyway, but we did. And we went through this process of basically selling pretty much everything we owned. And it was a totally cathartic experience. And you don't realize mentally how tied you are to things. And once you get rid of those ties, you feel free. It sounds quite hippie-ish and strange, but it's one of those experiences when you go through it, you don't realize mentally how much those things are holding you back effectively. So when we left, we had 2 suitcases and 3 hand luggages for a family of 4 that was basically all our possessions.
Wow. Wow. Yeah,
and we came back with a similar amount. We didn't accumulate a load of stuff.
Right. That's. I think you're right, Richard. I think that in itself can be a wider topic, because I'm sure people are thinking about their own circumstances and how emotionally tied they are. And I can certainly think that when I moved from Wakefield to Harrogate, and had to let go of sort of 19 years of things, and suddenly being hit with this emotional tie. But you're right, the freedom it brings can be quite incredible. I'm aware that we've run out of time, Richard, and it's been wonderful. Yeah, wonderful chatting with you. Thank you so much for your time. It's been really interesting, and I'm sure it's been interesting for the listeners and thought-provoking as well. Now, Richard, in terms of No Code Ninja, how can people get hold of you if they'd like to talk with you further about your work?
Yeah, so the easiest way is to just go to the website, which is nocodeninja.co.uk. Or if anyone's got any questions, wants to ask me anything about any of that, you can look me up on LinkedIn under my name. So just Richard Eaton, Eaton.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Richard. And have a good rest of the day, won't you?
And you. Thanks, man.